At least now Connor can find a real woman. One who understands that a man needs children, not rank. 11 seconds. That's how long that voicemail lasted. I kept it. I don't know why. Maybe because something in me already understood that one day, in one specific room, those 11 seconds would matter more than anything I could say myself. It was 2:48 inches the morning at Novant Health in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I was in active labor when the delivery room door opened, and I looked up and saw my ex-husband standing there in a white coat, still wearing his hospital badge, still looking exactly like the man I had married 4 years ago. For one full second, I genuinely thought the pain medication had finally done something interesting. He wasn't supposed to be here. Nobody moved. Then my best friend Simone, who had been holding my hand for 6 straight hours and threatening the nursing staff with a level of creativity I will always admire, said, and I quote, "Oh, you have got times to be kidding me. I want to stop here for a second, because I know what you're thinking. You're thinking this is a story about running back into someone's arms at the worst possible moment and deciding fate brought you together? I promise you, it is not that story. This is about something harder and something better. My name is Maya. I was a logistics officer in the United States Army, stationed near Fort Liberty. And before that, before the uniform and the rank and the years of learning how to solve problems with whatever materials I had available, I was a woman who spent 3 years quietly believing her body had failed her. 3 years carrying shame that, as it turned out, was never mine. Let me start where things actually started. I was 34 years old when I met Dr. Connor Aldridge at a veterans health fundraiser outside Charlotte. He was tall, steady, the kind of man who listened when other people spoke instead of just waiting for his turn to talk. I noticed that immediately. We talked for 2 hours before either of us realized the event was nearly over. Our first real date lasted 4 hours. Our second one lasted 6. 8 months after we met, we were married at a small venue in South End, 30 people. Late September, oak leaves just starting to turn. The first year was good, genuinely good. We had a house in Ballantyne. We argued about kitchen renovations and fell asleep watching documentaries. We were normal. I loved normal. After years of deployments, of waking up before dawn, of solving crises before breakfast, normal felt like a reward I'd finally earned. We decided to start a family about a year into the marriage. Neither of us expected it to take long. I was healthy. He was a physician. We figured biology would cooperate eventually. It didn't. 1 month became 6. 6 became 12. 12 became 2 years. And every single month, I felt the same quiet devastation of a clock ticking in a room no one else could hear. I tracked everything. Ovulation windows, temperature charts, supplements, sleep, nutrition, stress levels. I approached it the way I approached every challenge in the Army, with documentation, discipline, and the belief that effort would eventually produce results. When my OB suggested fertility workups, I said yes immediately. No hesitation. Everything came back normal. I remember sitting in that parking lot outside the clinic, reading a perfectly clean report, and feeling something I didn't expect. Not relief, just confusion. Because if everything was fine on my end, then what were we missing? I called Connor from the car. Everything looks good on my side. You should schedule your testing. A pause. Yeah, I'll get that set up. I believed him. I should have noticed what didn't happen next. But I was still in the phase where I extended generous interpretations to the people I loved. It's a nice quality. It's also how people get hurt. Then there was Patricia. Connor's mother was a woman who could deliver a wound so smoothly. You didn't feel it until later, when you were driving home, and you suddenly pulled over because you needed a minute. She was immaculate pearls, pressed linen, sweet tea, and Sunday church. She'd been hoping Connor would marry Brooke. Brooke was a pediatric nurse practitioner who went to the right church, smiled the right smile, and had the right last name going back 3 generations in Mecklenburg County. Brooke never did anything wrong to me. I want to be clear about that. She was always perfectly polite. The problem was that Patricia treated her like a before photo, and me like the disappointing after. The first time I met Patricia, she hugged me, told me Connor was lucky to have found someone so times different, and smiled in a way that made the word different feel like a diagnosis. Over the years, the comments refined themselves. Not crueler, necessarily more targeted. Some women are just built for certain kinds of lives. Or, at a Sunday lunch where Brooke had stopped by to drop off church supplies, Brooke has always had this natural gift with children. You can just sense it on some women. She didn't look at me when she said it. She didn't need to. And every single time Connor stared at his plate. I asked him about it once. We were doing dishes after dinner, water running, completely ordinary evening. I said his name. He said, Times. I asked him why he never defended me. He told me he did. I said, no times you calm me down afterward. That's different. He went quiet. And I already knew the answer, which was that there wasn't one worth giving. One Tuesday evening, I sat alone in a Walmart parking lot in Pineville holding another negative test. It was dusk. Families were loading groceries into minivans around me. A toddler was throwing a fit near the cart return. A couple was arguing affectionately about what they needed to buy before next weekend. Life was moving at full volume. I just sat there and cried harder than I had in months. Not because of the test. I'd had negative tests before. I cried because for the first time I fully understood that I was going through this alone. Not because Connor wasn't present, he was physically there. But he had never been times with times me in it. I was the one scheduling the appointments. I was the one tracking the data. I was the one sitting in parking lots at dusk, while his mother's voice played on a loop in my memory, and he was somewhere else. That was the night I think the marriage actually ended. The divorce took 7 more months to finalize. By the end, we both knew. The legal paperwork was almost a formality, we were just making official what had already become true. The day it was done, I moved into a smaller place in Noda. I boxed things up. I didn't cry. I'd already used all my crying on the Pineville Walmart parking lot. 3 weeks later, I fainted during a logistics briefing at Fort Liberty. Stood up in front of a whiteboard full of supply chain data, and woke up on the floor with 3 corporals staring down at me like I had been shot. Simone arrived at the base clinic 20 minutes later, and looked at me with her head tilted. She said, "You look terrible." I told her thanks. She said, "No, I mean you look pregnant." I told her that was impossible. She was not wrong. The clinic doctor, a kind woman who somehow delivered the news like she was telling me about a pleasant forecast, showed me the results and said, "Captain Webb, you're several weeks along." I stared at the tablet. Then I laughed once, the confused kind, not the happy kind. I said, "That's not possible." She said, "Well, biologically times," I said. "We tried for years." She paused, then said, very gently, "Sometimes these things happen later than expected. Sometimes." Such a small word for something that completely reorganizes your life. I drove home in silence. Didn't turn on the radio. Sat in my driveway for 45 minutes staring at the steering wheel. Pregnant. At 37. After the divorce. After 3 years of charts and doctor visits and carrying shame, I could taste every time I sat at Patricia's table. I picked up my phone and opened Connor's contact. My thumb sat there. And then a memory surfaced clear as daylight. Patricia's kitchen. Her voice carrying through the hall to where I was setting the table. "Women like her just aren't built for it. Connor needs someone who can give him a real family." I locked my phone and tossed it on the seat. "Not yet. I need you to understand something about that decision. It wasn't cruelty. It wasn't spite. It was self-protection, the kind you develop when you've spent years watching someone you love fail to defend you against the people who were supposed to love you both. I wasn't ready to hand my pregnancy to a system that had already used it against me once. So I called Simone instead. And then I called an attorney named Renee Torres, who came highly recommended by a JAG officer I trusted. And for the next several months, I built a paper fortress around myself and my unborn child. Medical records. Conception timeline. Documented dates. I kept everything in folders labeled by month, backed up in 3 places. Simone found me on the kitchen floor one night, surrounded by it all. She sat down across from me and said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Preparing." She said, "For what?" I said, "I don't know yet, but I did know. I was preparing for the moment this stopped being private and became contested." A few months later, Simone dragged me to a Waffle House after a prenatal appointment because she said I needed protein, and I said I needed sleep, and she said I could have eggs first. We slid into a booth near the window. A woman in her mid-50s approached our table carrying coffee. Brown hair, kind face, the manner of someone who had worked in an administrative role for decades, and still remembered everyone. Simone introduced her Vera, someone she'd served with years ago. We made small talk. Then, Vera heard my last name. She went still, just slightly, the way people do when they recognize something they didn't expect to encounter. She said, "I used to manage a men's health clinic over in South Park." I said nothing. She looked uncomfortable. I probably shouldn't say this. Simone leaned forward. Vera lowered her voice. I remember a doctor. Connor Aldridge coming in a couple of years ago. I can't discuss anything private. Then she paused. But if you ever have attorneys involved in custody questions, make sure they ask the right ones. She stood up. She said she was sorry. She walked away. For a long moment, neither Simone nor I spoke. The Waffle House kept going around us. Plates rattling, country music, a couple arguing about hash browns at the next table over. Normal life at full volume again. I felt sick. Not because I was surprised. Because I wasn't surprised at all, and that was somehow worse. Simone said my name quietly. I said, "Don't soften it," she exhaled. Because we both understood what Vera had left on the table without saying out loud. If Connor had visited a men's health clinic before the divorce, he already knew there might be concerns on his side. And he said nothing. He let me schedule every appointment and track every cycle and sit in every parking lot and absorb every one of his mother's comments, all while carrying a question that may have already had an answer sitting in a file somewhere with his name on it. I made it to the bathroom before I got sick. When I came back, Simone was waiting with her hands folded on the table. Neither of us made a joke. I said, I need to think like Noah's mother now. That was the first time I used the name out loud. It startled both of us. Simone's eyes went soft. Then that's what we do, she said. Noah arrived on a Thursday at 3:17 inches the morning. 37 weeks. The labor was brutal. 8 hours of it, my back splitting, the blood pressure monitor alarming twice, a young nurse named Tasha checking the fetal monitor with a frown that I noticed and chose not to analyze too closely. Simone held my hand through all of it. She fed me ice chips and threatened anyone who lingered in the doorway too long. And then the door opened. Connor stopped dead in the threshold. The color left his face in real time. His ID badge said Times, emergency medicine Times, and his expression said every thought he'd had since the divorce had just collided with the sight of me in that bed. Nobody moved. Then Simone said what she said. Connor stepped in not as my ex-husband, but as a physician. I watched it happen. His eyes went to the monitor. His jaw tightened. He asked about my vitals, took the chart from Tasha, and his whole face reorganized itself into the calm, methodical expression I had once admired completely. 37 weeks, he said, almost to himself. Then his eyes came up slowly. 37 weeks. The math happening in real time. He swallowed once. I said, don't, quietly. Not right now. The next 20 minutes were just medicine. He moved around the room, giving instructions in that steady voice, the same voice that had once talked me through a panic attack at midnight when I'd come home from a difficult rotation. The same voice that had once made me feel like everything was going to be okay. Funny, how the people who save you sometimes share a face with the people who broke you. One final push. A cry filled the room that I will spend the rest of my life trying to describe accurately, and failing. Everything stopped. All of it. Every lonely night, every negative test, every whispered comment in every Sunday kitchen, it all went completely quiet. My son was in the world. I started crying immediately. No dignity, complete surrender. Simone was crying too. Tasha had a hand pressed to her mouth. Connor picked Noah up. For a second, he just looked at him, and I watched something move through his face that I had never seen there before. Something close to undone. He wrapped him carefully and walked over to me. As he placed Noah in my arms, I saw his hands tremble. Just slightly, but I noticed. Noah settled against my chest like he already understood where home was. The room cleared eventually. Simone stayed. Connor stayed too, near the window. The silence stretched. Is he mine? I didn't look up. I said, this is not the place for that question. My voice was calm, steadier than I felt. Connor looked at the floor. I said, he is my son. Whether you become his father is an entirely separate question that requires an entirely different conversation. 3 months later, through attorneys, the DNA test confirmed what anyone with functioning eyes had already concluded. Noah had Connor's exact jaw, his slate blue eyes, a dimple in his left cheek that matched the photo on Connor's hospital ID. 2 weeks after that, my attorney Renee called me on a Thursday afternoon while I was folding onesies in my living room. Noah was asleep in his bassinet. The apartment was quiet. We received the records, she said. Leah, Connor, underwent fertility testing 9 months before the divorce was filed. There were documented concerns, sperm count, and motility. A follow-up was recommended. He declined it. I closed my eyes. There it was. 3 years of charts. 3 years of doctor visits and shame and sitting through Sunday lunches and absorbing the weight of being the problem. 3 years of a story I'd told myself about my own body. And it was never my story to begin with. I sat in the silence for a long time after the call ended. Not crying, not yelling, just sitting with the strangeness of what it feels like to set down something you've been carrying so long you forgot it wasn't yours. Noah woke up and started fussing. I picked him up automatically, held him against my shoulder. And what I felt in that moment, to my own complete surprise, was not devastation. I felt free. If you have ever carried blame that was given to you by someone who needed a place to put it, if you've ever spent years quietly apologizing for a wound someone else made, then you know what that moment feels like. When the weight lifts, when you realize the story was never true, it doesn't make you angry right away. It just makes you very, very quiet. Then a church invitation arrived in the mail. Grace Point Community Church, South Charlotte. Family Appreciation Banquet. Military families honored. Community volunteers recognized. And at the bottom, a name. Patricia Aldridge Women's Mentorship Award recipient. Mentorship. I laughed so hard. Noah startled in the bassinet. I called Simone. She read the invitation, and her expression went through 4 distinct phases before landing on a grin. She said, "You're going, aren't you?" I said, "No." She said, "You are absolutely going." I said the last thing I needed was a scene. She said, "You don't need a scene. You just need people to finally hear the truth." She wasn't wrong about that. The banquet was a Friday evening in early October. Warm enough for shirt sleeves, cool enough to feel the season changing. I wore my dress uniform because military families were being formally honored, and also because it still fit, mostly. Noah wore a blue outfit Simone had bought him that made him look like a tiny executive at a very casual firm. The fellowship hall at Grace Point looked exactly like every Southern church fellowship hall in America. Long folding tables, white tablecloths, pot roast, green beans, sweet tea, sheet cake from a warehouse club, veterans near the front, church women near the middle. And Patricia, at a table of honor, pearls on, smile practiced. She spotted me within 30 seconds. She crossed the room. The smile arrived first. "Maya," she said. "Well." Her eyes dropped to Noah. Something moved through her face, something real, almost before the social mask snapped back into position. "He's certainly grown," I said. "Babies do that." The women nearby laughed. Patricia didn't. The evening moved through dinner and announcements and recognition awards with complete Southern civility. And then Patricia stepped to the podium. She thanked the church leadership. She thanked her son, who was seated near the front, head lowered. She thanked her volunteers and her church family. And then she began talking about motherhood, about sacrifice, about the kind of strength that doesn't seek recognition. At first it sounded like what it was supposed to be a gracious acceptance speech. Then it shifted. "A strong family," she said, smiling at the room, "requires women willing to place the people they love above their own ambitions." Heads nodded. Not every woman is called to that kind of life. A pause. Some women prioritize careers and recognition and status. Smile. Nod. But raising a family, truly raising one, requires a different kind of woman entirely. The room felt smaller. I was back at every Sunday table. Every kitchen comment. Every sideways glance. Every prayer request that was actually a whisper. I could feel all of it like a temperature change. I looked at Connor. He was staring at the table, just like every Sunday dinner. Just like every time Patricia sharpened her words and aimed them at me, and he found something very interesting to study in his plate. I felt something settle inside me. Not break, settle. Like muddy water after a storm finally going still. And I understood something in that moment with absolute clarity. If I stayed quiet tonight, nothing would change. Not for me. Not for the people in this room who had spent years hearing one version of this story. And not for Noah, who would grow up in a town where certain people would always know him as the child of the woman who times couldn't. I stood up. Simone looked at me. She didn't try to stop me. She just looked. I walked toward the front of the room. The conversations shifted the way they always do when something unexpected begins to happen. Pastor Graham looked up from the head table. "Captain Webb," I said. "May I say something?" He hesitated. Nodded. I don't think he knew what he was agreeing to. But he recognized something in my face that told him this was already decided. I took the microphone. I looked around the room for a moment, not angry, not performing, just honest. My name is Maya Webb. Some of you know me as a soldier. Some of you know me as Dr. Connor Aldridge's ex-wife. And some of you know me as the woman who couldn't have children. The room went absolutely still. That last one was never true. Patricia stepped forward. Maya times I raised one hand. Calm. Firm. I'd done more difficult things in worse conditions than this. She stopped. I spent 3 years believing something was wrong with my body. My voice held. I tracked cycles. I took tests. I followed every instruction my doctors gave me. I carried the weight of that quietly, and I carried it alone. For years, that story circulated in this community, that I was the reason our marriage failed to produce a family. I let that land. I'm here to tell you it was not true. Silence. And I think some of the people in this room helped keep that story alive. I reached into my purse. I pulled out my phone. Mrs. Aldridge left me a voicemail 6 months before the divorce was finalized. I kept it. Patricia's face went pale. Not dramatically, just enough. I pressed play. Her voice filled the hall. Familiar, smooth. At least now Connor can find a real woman. One who understands that a man needs children, not rank. The recording lasted 11 seconds. For a moment, you could hear the air conditioning. Then a veteran near the front shook his head slowly. A woman beside him crossed her arms. Someone near the back said something quiet that traveled anyway. The mood shifted. Not because of drama, because of recognition. Suddenly, the room wasn't hearing a family dispute. They were hearing the mechanics of a reputation, carefully built and deliberately aimed. They understood what it was. Patricia said. That recording doesn't tell the whole story. I met her eyes. It tells enough. She opened her mouth, closed it. Then Connor stood up. I heard the chair scrape against the floor. Every head in the room turned toward him. I turned too. And I want to be honest with you, part of me still expected him to say something deflecting. Old habits are powerful. But he looked at the audience and he said, quietly but clearly, Maya is right. Marlene stared at him. Connor. No. His voice stayed level. I knew. Before the divorce. There were fertility concerns on my side. I had testing done, and I didn't tell her. He swallowed. I was ashamed. I let my mother's narrative become the one everyone believed because it was easier than admitting the truth. And I let Maya carry blame that was never hers. Gasps. Several people genuinely shocked. Whitney Brooke, sitting 2 tables over, looked like someone had quietly rearranged everything she thought she'd known. I'm sorry, he said. To the room. To me. He said it like someone who had finally stopped lying to themselves. Patricia sat down. Pastor Graham quietly stepped forward and suggested a short break. The event ended in the particular awkward silence of people who need to reconsider things. No shouting, no dramatic exit. Just a room full of people slowly rethinking years of assumptions. Honestly, that felt better than any scene ever could. The October air outside was cool and exact. Simone stood beside me holding Noah. People filtered out slowly. Conversation started. Truth works fast once it's released. Connor came outside a few minutes later. He stopped a few feet away. He looked at Noah. He looked at me. I'm sorry, he said. I know. I adjusted Noah's blanket. I'm sorry too. He looked confused. For what? For spending years asking people to see my worth. Saying it out loud, I realized how true it was. I had spent years auditing myself through other people's eyes, trying to be enough for a room that had already decided its verdict. I'm done doing that. He asked the question. The one everyone was waiting for. Is there any chance? No, it came out gently. Not bitterly. Not because I hate you. I don't. But love isn't the only thing that matters. Respect matters. Honesty matters. Character matters. And I'm not willing to rebuild something on a foundation that was never stable. He looked at the ground. What do I do now? I looked at Noah, sleeping against Simone's shoulder. Then I looked back at his father. Be present. Consistently. Not when it's convenient consistently. That's what being a father actually is. He nodded. And for the first time in years, I actually believed him when he agreed. What I know now, that I didn't understand when I was sitting in parking lots crying over pregnancy tests, is this. The cruelest thing someone can do to you is convince you that you are the source of your own suffering. Because then you spend all your energy trying to fix yourself instead of examining the story you were handed. Patricia didn't destroy my self-worth with one comment. She did it slowly, consistently, with Planichka. Over Sunday lunches and polite teas. That's how it actually works. Not like a sledgehammer, like water finding a crack. But here's what else I know. The same resilience that gets you through a deployment, the one that says, times assess, adapt, keep moving. Times it works in ordinary life too. I just had to learn to apply it to myself, the way I applied it to everything else. Stop waiting for someone else to correct the record. Start building the documentation. Start trusting your own account of your own life. The mistake most people make is thinking that they have to choose between peace and justice. They don't. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply put the truth in a room that has been living on lies calmly, factually, and without apology, and let people decide what to do with it. Months have passed now. Noah is thriving. He has his father's eyes, and my stubbornness and Simone's ability to make everyone in a room stop what they're doing and pay attention. Connor shows up consistently. Not perfectly, but consistently, which is what I asked for. Patricia no longer has unsupervised access, and that boundary stays. Renee Torres made sure of it. Some mornings I still grieve the marriage I thought I was building. I think that's okay. Grief and peace can live in the same heart. I've learned they don't have to fight for space. I want to ask you something before I go. If you were in my position, if you discovered you were carrying a child after a divorce, after years of being told you were the problem, after learning the truth had been sitting in a folder with someone else's name on it, what would you do? Would you have called him immediately? Or would you have protected yourself first and told him on your own terms? Drop a 1 in the comments if you would have called him right away. Drop a 2 if you would have waited the way I did. Drop a 3 if you would have handled it entirely differently, and I need to hear how, because I genuinely want to know. Also, where are you watching from right now? What time is it there? I always think about the person watching at 2 inches the morning who needs to hear that surviving something broken doesn't make you broken. It makes you informed. And if you've ever had to rebuild your life after someone convinced you that you were the problem, I hope this story reminded you of something important. The weight was never yours. You were just the only one strong enough to carry it, which is exactly why they handed it to you. If this story stayed with you, please subscribe. New stories go up every week, and I promise they are always worth your time. Thank you for being here with me tonight. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Charlotte, North Carolina to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is entirely coincidental.